call our meeting to order, and the first thing on the agenda is the oath of office.
Okay.
Here?
I, Marcia A. Wyman,
I, Marcia A. Wyman,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the constitutions
that I will support the constitutions
of the United States and the state of Minnesota,
of the United States and the state of Minnesota,
and will faithfully discharge the duties
and will faithfully discharge the duties
of the office of manager
of the office of manager
of the Rice Creek Watershed District
of the Rice Creek Watershed District
to the best of my judgment and ability.
to the best of my judgment as a
I remember right then is when it felt real.
See, Barbara was on for 17 years. You got a ways to go, kid.
Yeah? Yeah, you got me. I'm gonna outlast her. You're gonna work for it.
All right, next thing on the agenda is the roll call. All members are present. Make note for the minutes. Next thing is set the agenda. Any changes to the agenda today?
Staff have no changes.
Okay, and we need a motion to approve.
Madam President, I move we approve the agenda as provided.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Ready? Okay, Madam President, I move to approve the January 6, 2020 workshop minutes.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion?
President Preiner? Staff do have an adjustment.
Okay.
Would be on page 4 of your packet.
No, this is the workshop.
Okay.
So it is on your screen. You can see there about mid-page, line 14. We'll put the acronym in for Citizen Advisory Committee and then clarify the language that Mr. LeBlanc, when he was present, was representing himself and not the CAC.
We good with that?
Yep.
Anything else on the,
That would be it for the workshop.
okay, we have a motion and a second with corrections. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye. Madam President, I move to approve the January 8th, 2020 regular meeting minutes.
Second?
I'll second that.
President Preiner, Board of Managers, we note that at that meeting, we did have Marcy as a visitor, so we'll adjust the minutes accordingly for that, which is on page 7 of your packet. And then jumping to page 19 of the packet. We cleared up the language regarding my comments, starting there on line 482. I think it might be easier for you to just take a peek at them there on the screen versus me reading it.
I'm sorry, Nick, which line did you say?
Yes, 482 is the first line where there's a correction.
Oh, I see, okay.
Yeah. so
Thank you.
The strikeouts and the additions are on the screen there.
Any comments on that? We have a motion and a second with corrections. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
We move on to Nick, anything else?
No, is that efficient? Is comfortable with that? Thank you.
Thank you. Consent agenda?
President Preiner, Board of Managers, we have one application for your consideration today.
Any manager comments on that? I'll entertain a motion.
Madam President, I'll move the consent agenda, which only has one permit, 19-115 for Cap Rock.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Is this where we explain to Manager Winans what her new role is, though? Because Barbara never would have let that go through without some sort of inquiry.
We won't explain that today.
I think it's fair to say that it would be the next item where the inquiry.
Yeah, definitely. This one would have.
Okay. Okay.
President Priner, Board of Managers, we also have one application that is for consideration as well as for a variance. I would note that there is one proposed change starting on page 30 of the packet. That is the first page of the engineer's report. It would be a new compliance item number 2 with the language, submit the permit application with the signature of the successful bidder to the district. Pretty common compliance item for public projects. So that is the first part. And then this application is the reconstruction of the Silver Lake boat landing. And we can go through the variants here. I'd ask Mr. Otterness to work for the project summary.
Patrick, just so I understand, is a new item 2, and then we renumber the rest of them, right?
Correct.
Madam President, Board of Managers, the proposed project is located on approximately 2-acre parcel east of 41st Avenue Northeast and Stinson Boulevard Northeast. Applicant is proposing to construct a boat launch and associated parking. The proposed redevelopment will result in an increase of approximately 0.2 acres of impervious surface from the existing 0.2 acres for a total now of 0.4 acres. In addition, the applicant is proposing to reconstruct 0.2 acres of impervious surface. The runoff discharges into the existing BMP and then directly into Silver Lake, the resource of concern. The project proposes to fill approximately 58 cubic yards within the floodplain to meet the required boat launch grades as required by the DNR. The DNR requires the boat launch slopes to be between 13 to 18% from the edge of water to the end of the ramp and 8 to 13% in the transitional zone of the boat launch. The applicant has maximized slopes to be compliant with DNR regulations while minimizing the floodplain fill. In addition, the applicant has minimized the width of the boat landing to 12 feet as required by the DNR. The 100-year floodplain elevation of Silver Lake is 934.52. The proposed application is compliant with all other Rice Creek Watershed District rules.
Okay, next we'll run through the evaluation of criteria. Criterion A, how substantial the variation is in relation to district rule requirements.
Per this criterion A, the applicant proposes to place 58 cubic yards of fill within the floodplain without providing compensatory floodplain storage. Per district rule E3B, mitigation must be provided equal to the amount of floodplain fill.
Criterion B, the effect the variance would have on government services.
Issuance of a variance for the Silver Lake boat landing reconstruction project is not expected to increase the cost or difficulty of providing governmental services.
Criterion C, whether the variance will affect a substantial change in the character of the watershed resources or will be a substantial detriment to neighboring properties.
We look at the several criteria when considering whether the variance will affect a substantial change in the character or resources within the watershed. We use 3 criteria to assess the substantial change, first of which being water quality, defining the quality of pollutants or quantity of pollutants such as phosphorus and suspended sediment leaving the site and the potential for degrading water quality downstream. Secondly, the presence and potential impact to special and impaired water bodies as defined by various laws, including the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency Stormwater Program, whether a water body is impaired and related designations, including wild and scenic or outstanding natural resource value designations. And thirdly, flooding, the potential for flood damages or other adverse hydrologic impacts. When we're completing these assessments of the substantial change, we considered a variety of different items, including the 303D listed water body, in other words, impaired water, high quality or non-degraded wetland, federally listed threatened or endangered species or state threatened, endangered, or species of special concern in their critical habitat, a scientific and natural area as defined by the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, resources protected from degradation as defined within Chapter 7050 OAD1, a non-degradation for outstanding resource value waters, and other generally sensitive resources. Per this criterion and whether the variance will have a negative effect, we also considered whether the granting variance will first cause or contribute a change to the 100-year floodplain elevation immediately downstream or upstream of the project site. Second, whether it has increased the frequency or magnitude of flood damages to adjacent properties, or three, whether there's increased hardship downstream from peak flow or flood duration. For this project, although Silver Lake is impaired for chloride and nutrients, the applicant has met the Rule C water quality through an existing BMP and sumps, and thus the variance for 58 cubic yards of floodplain fill is not expected to affect the water quality of Silver Lake. The 100-year flood elevation of Silver Lake does not change from existing conditions, as the 58 cubic yards of floodplain fill would result in less than 1/100th of an inch of rise in the 100-year elevation. Non-compliance with the floodplain requirements of Rule E3B for the boat landing will not have a negative effect on neighboring properties.
Criterion D, whether the practical difficulty can be alleviated by a feasible method other than a variance.
Due to the steep existing slopes and requirements of the DNR, the boat landing cannot feasibly be built to meet the district's requirements. The DNR requires the boat launch slopes to be between 8 to 13% in the transitional zones down to the edge of the water, which results in the need for floodplain fill, as the existing average slope on the site is 16%. The applicant has maximized slopes to be compliant with DNR regulations while minimizing the floodplain fill. In addition to this, and one thing that is not noted in our memorandum is that the site was designed to be ADA compliant as well, so they're also meeting federal regulations. The applicant has also proposed to build the boat landing to the minimum width requirement of the DNR, which is 12 feet, thus reducing the required floodplain fill. The applicant has reviewed 4 alternatives. First, a no-build alternative. Second, rebuild to the existing slopes. Third, mitigate the fill through on-site excavation. And 4, mitigate the fill through off-site excavation. However, none of these 4 alternatives are feasible. The no-build alternative is infeasible, as the boat launch is considered a public benefit that needs improvements. Rebuilding the existing slopes is not feasible because the DNR funding is being used for the project, and for the DNR funds to be available, the slopes must comply with DNR requirements. Mitigation was investigated on site. However, the entire shoreline would need to be modified and would not have provided enough mitigation, thus not feasible. Off-site mitigation was investigated. However, the only other city-owned property on Silver Lake is the park located on the northwest side of the lake. The applicant has indicated that there is no opportunity to modify the shoreline, which consists of beach, to provide additional floodplain mitigation.
Criterion E, how the practical difficulty occurred, including whether the landowner created the need for the variance.
The district engineer finds that the need for the variance from District Rule E3B was not created by the applicant because of the existing steep slope, ground slopes, and the slope requirements of the DNR. The slopes cannot be modified to meet the district requirements without the variance request. The slopes have been maximized to the DNR requirements to minimize the floodplain impact. Any lesser impact would result in the project being infeasible.
And lastly, criterion F, whether in light of all of the above factors, allowing the variance will serve the interests of justice.
As always, this criterion lies largely in the board's domain, as it involves judgments of a non-technical nature. One criterion for assessing the portion of the practical difficulty standard is the ability or inability of other permit applicants with similar site conditions to comply with the district's floodplain requirements of Rule E3B. Other applicants have had the ability to feasibly meet the requirements on site. However, the practical difficulties provided by this project site, namely the existing slopes and the DNR requirements for the boat landings, make it unique to the other sites. Another consideration is the relationship of the existing rule to the public interest. The intent of Rule E3B is to protect downstream resources and preserve the existing floodplain volume. In this case, the applicant has indicated that the floodplain impact is insignificant and there is no increased flood risk.
Hi, I'm just moving around.
Feel free. Oh, there, okay. All right.
When they're done, I had a quick question for Beth, actually, if possible, on this. Yeah, I do.
Sure, okay.
Well, you want to
When
speak now?
she's done, when you're done.
That's the presentation.
That's it?
Yep.
Okay.
I have a couple of
Go ahead.
questions.
That's good.
First of all, an observation, we've been real tough on anyone who wanted forgiveness for filling in floodplains, on the grounds that if everyone would like to be exempt from that, and so if you do it for one, why don't you do it for the next? So it's troubling to me. I take comfort in the fact it's 1/100th of an inch, so it's pretty de minimis. But as a practical policy issue, we haven't done this. And we had a gentleman here who had to cut down a stand of trees to fill in, 38 cubic feet or something? The other point is, I just don't understand, because apparently in order to reach the appropriate percentage grade, they're filling in at the foot, so they're raising the foot so it's not too steep. Well, the other way you can fix this is by lowering the runout, the head, the crown of it. Why can't they make the ramp longer and less abrupt, lower slope? Why can't they excavate at the top?
Manager Bradley, my understanding is that if they do that excavation, then they run fall with the rest of the grades on site, including the ADA standard requirements. So to meet ADA requirements, I believe the standard is that you can't have a cross slope of greater than 2%. They have parking that's adjacent to the ramp. It's a pretty small site, and the ramp, the end of the ramp is really essentially a parking aisle distance away from the rest of the parking. So if you were to lower that ramp, then all of a sudden the parking that they're providing for ADA requirements would no longer meet those requirements.
Thank you, that satisfies me.
Madam President. So when we have a rule that we have a number of variances to, maybe it's time to take a look at that rule. And I think that's the point that you are bringing about. I just wanted to make sure I understood it.
But I'm avoiding using the term that this is a slippery slope. So,
I'm glad you
I
did.
think that's why they want to put the
This
fill
one
in.
is,
That's the purpose of the fill, so it isn't a slippery slope.
And I agree that should be looked at. We
I
have
think
had several.
we've had
of these.
several
Yeah.
of this,
Yeah.
and so it's time to review that.
Yep. That's generally
All
good.
right, all right. Yes, Miss Teresa, I will speak into the mic, hopefully.
Okay, and you wanted to hear from Beth?
yeah, I do have a quick question.
Please come up to the mic, state your name and address for the record.
Don't panic, this is real easy.
I don't usually do regulatory anything.
No, we had a meeting a while back, and this project came up, and I don't even remember under what circumstances or anything, but.
So
my-
this, if I remember correctly, and help me out here, by the way, my name is Beth Carreño, I'm with the Rice Creek Watershed District. Kyle Axtell's Stormwater Grant Cost Share Program has provided funding to a project in Columbia Heights to retrofit an old boat landing into an iron enhanced sand filter. I don't believe it's on this lake. Anyone?
Hey, Let me
Am I-
tell you my question.
Am I coming down it is on this lake?
It's on Silver Lake.
Yeah.
yes.
But it's not this project.
Yeah, it is part of it. But my question, though, is, you had mentioned some positives about it, just an offhand, and one of them, I think it had to do with obviously with it being a benefit to the people disabled. But was there something else? I thought there was a few things you were mentioning, and I just couldn't remember what they were.
Well, the iron enhanced sand filter would be a water quality benefit.
Yep.
On Bald Eagle Lake, where we did a multi-tiered rain garden with our master water stewards, and they did a shoreline restoration there at a former boat launch. There are some ADA, they went in and did some approaches for kayaks, and I believe some ADA accessible path. But that is just my recollection, that's not my recent research.
Okay.
Yeah,
I couldn't remember. I thought there was,
okay, yeah.
thank you.
But the other one was in relation to the stormwater quality grant, and I didn't know that, it is in conjunction with this project, so Matt's saying that the iron enhanced sand filter is
Yeah.
in conjunction with this project, so.
Thank
Does
you.
that help? Okay.
Yes, it does.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Okay, any further questions? None? Okay, page 29 are motions. Number 1 for the variance request.
Madam President, I move that we approve the variance request for application 19-119 as outlined in accordance with the Rice Creek Watershed District Engineers Variance Technical Memorandum dated January 15, 2020.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, and the permit application?
Madam President, I recommend we cap rock, I believe that's correct in this case, permit 19-119 is outlined in accordance with Rice Creek Watershed District Engineers' findings and recommendations dated January 15, 2020. With the additional requirement, the new number 2.
I'd second that. Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, motion passed. Thank you.
President Reiner, I'll just note that staff in Houston are assembling some of the rule revisions. We are making collection of that as soon as we kind of get our ducks in a row, prioritizing those. We'll bring them back to a workshop. I think it'd be good for us to have a discussion about where we're headed with that before we execute any task order.
I agree. Thank you, Dave. Okay, the next thing is the election of officers.
Madam President, I'd like to make the following nominations. For president, I'd like to nominate manager Pat Preiner. For vice president, I'd like to nominate Mike Bradley. For treasurer, manager Wegeman. Second vice president, John Waller. And secretary, Marcia Wynant.
Marcy.
Wynant?
Winan, yes.
Wynant? Good.
Yeah.
So do we need to take those one at a time?
Madam Chair, board members, my understanding would be that Manager Wagman is moving a slate of candidates.
Yes.
Which would be an ordinary motion subject to second and then a vote. If any manager objects to proceeding with a slate and would like to proceed one by one, then that manager has that prerogative.
In which case, I would second the motion.
Motion made and seconded. And I believe it has to be a roll call. Manager Waller?
Well, Madam President, in the past, I have always voted against a slate and continuance of the same officers because I believe strongly in their rotation. But I'll begin to speak about that later in manager reports. As this year, I was caught off a little off guard. We generally have this election in February at the next meeting, but within the rules, it's proper to have it today. And so I hope we'll have a discussion about instituting a policy for rotating these officers on an annual basis. So this time I will vote yes for the current slate.
Thank you.
Okay, Manager Wyatt?
Yes.
Manager Bradley?
Yes.
Manager.
Yes.
And I'll say yes. So we will move forward. Any further discussion? So we're on to the check register, page 44.
Pardon me, I'm behind schedule here. Gotta find it. One more. Okay. Madam President, I move to approve the check register dated January 22, 2020, in the amount of $326,802.37, prepared by Redpath and Company.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, items for discussion. Beth, I believe you're up.
Yeah, President Preiner, we have our, Beth is going to speak to it. I was just gonna
Go ahead.
make a comment as she's coming up, and here she is.
Oh, go ahead.
Just to finalize our CAC operating procedures. Yeah, why don't I just leave it at that?
Okay. Beth, you're on.
All right. No additional board action is required for you, or from you on the CAC procedures. At this point, the CAC has kind of created some information, presented it to you. You've requested some changes. Those changes are reflected in this document. And kind of with your acceptance, then we move on and the CAC will kind of formally approve them and start utilizing these in their February meeting. So other than that, it's just, are there any questions?
Questions, Beth?
An unrelated question, or semi-related. We now have a vacancy in Ramsey County.
We do, we do.
What do we do to try to fill that?
Sure. So Nick and I actually discussed this yesterday, and so we will, we have a vacancy still in Washington and in Ramsey. Because we were going through this and there were some unanswered questions, we did not go through the traditional recruitment that we would have normally done in the fall and early winter. So we have just pushed that to now. We'll be communicating with individuals that have expressed interest in the past. We'll be reaching out to our city and county partners in each of the locations. A lot of times they may have individuals serving on their environmental committees and things like that that might have an interest. We will talk to some of our master water steward candidates to see if anyone would like to also be on the CAC. And it has been recommended, there were additional people put forth, particularly in Ramsey County for the slate, and so we'll be sharing information with them. And then we'll use kind of our platforms of social media and the website. We'll do a kind of a recruitment process that way. And then, depending on how the applications come in, we'll go through those early vetting stages where we find out, do they live in the district? Get some information together. And if we have multiple candidates, then we would bring it to you at a workshop to kind of discuss, see if there's anyone you want to interview before making your final selections. That will happen kind of parallel. We will go ahead and have this group brought to you for renomination and, kind of keeping them moving as a CAC.
Yes. Having served on that CAC for the last 4 years, I certainly want to compliment Beth and her staff, as well as our current chair of that CAC, Bridget Osborne, for the work that we all did in putting this together, because we took pieces from a lot of different documents and collated them all in the same spot. It's a great Citizens Advisory Committee. I think they take their charge seriously, and also look forward to having the continual communication with this board. So having managers show up at the CAC meeting is an important aspect of that agenda.
Anything else? Anybody else?
Madam President, just recognize that I did read it after, and you did make the changes we were looking for, and
Yeah.
thank you for that. So I know that we're not looking for another action, so
No, we're good.
we're satisfied.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Matt, Lower Rice Creek.
Madam Chair, members of the board, Thank you for having me. I have for you today a couple of updates on projects and programs happening at Rice Creek. First up is our Lower Rice Creek Stabilization Project, and I'll give an update after this on our Carp Management Program. I have short presentations on each. As usual, if you have questions, please stop me and let me know.
Okay.
So if you recall, Lower Rice Creek Stabilization Projects, for both of these presentations, by the way, I have some background to refresh your memory and for the benefit of our new manager. Lower Rice Creek, as we define it, is found just upstream of the outlet of the Rice Creek watershed into the Mississippi River. So we would define it as downstream of Long Lake to the Mississippi River. Here's kind of a zoomed-in view of what Lower Rice Creek looks like, flowing from Long Lake through Lock Lake and into the Mississippi River. So the impetus of this project, or the reason for this project, there's two issues here. There's two problems. The first issue is sedimentation in Lock Lake. So immediately upstream of the Mississippi River, we have lots of sediment deposition happening in Lock Lake. These two photos here, you can make out some of that sediment deposition. Here we have Rice Creek flowing from the east to the west, so the right side of the picture to the left side of the picture. And here you can see this sediment delta forming in the eastern basin of Lock Lake. Here's kind of a different view of it from another angle. So this is an ongoing issue that's been exacerbated by higher flows in recent years with some of the heavy rains that we've had, especially that mega storm that we had in 2011, if you recall that. So that was kind of problem number one that got this project going. Secondly, this Lower Rice Creek is impaired for biota, so it's not meeting state standards for healthy biological communities. So to address these two issues, the Rice Creek Watershed District staff with the district engineer, Houston Engineering, did some diagnostic work, both field work and modeling. Here we are doing field work and data collection on Lower Rice Creek, and the photos that you see here of eroding banks are fairly common in this part of Rice Creek. And we knew that this was an issue, but some of this diagnostic work led us to the question of how much of a problem is it? Is this where we should be spending our resources to address this issue of sedimentation in Lock Lake? Is the problem these eroding stream banks? And in fact, it is. If we look at this graph here, if this is the total deposition of sediment in Lock Lake, a huge portion of that is from stream bank and bluff sources. So basically the erosion that I was showing you in those photos there.
Pardon, Madam President. Matt, just for clarity here, Lock Lake is a district facility and it's designed to catch sediment. So are you indicating that it's been highly successful in keeping the sediment out of the Mississippi River, which we have won an award for doing?
Manager Waller, it is highly
Successful.
successful at capturing sediment, yes.
And I just want to point out that
Yep.
a great expense and argumentation took place over building this facility some decades ago, and it really has been a successful project, even though it's time for some maintenance.
Yes, Manager Waller, I would say that is correct. Yep, Manager Wagman.
How close is, you showed that area where
Yeah, you
the
should brag
delta
up your
where it's
success.
settling in. How close is that to the surface?
Manager Wagman, depending on the water levels, which vary greatly in that part of Rice Creek and then therefore in Lock Lake, it can be actually at the surface or sticking out of the surface of the water during some times of the year. In the spring, it's a few inches to a foot underneath the surface, depending on where you are. So there's been a lot of sediment deposition in Lock Lake in recent years.
How deep is the water right there?
Yeah, again, depending on the time of the year, it can be, a few inches to a foot deep. Other parts of the lake, the deepest part of Lock Lake is 10 to 12 feet, something like that. So not a very deep lake. I'd add that Lock Lake is an impoundment, so it's not a natural water body. It was created originally as a mill pond, I think in the late 1800s, and then subsequently that dam has been improved or rebuilt several times. So Lock Lake now is a small impoundment. And all impoundments are good at capturing sediment. You're taking a flowing water body that's carrying sediment, and you lose all of that energy when it empties into an impoundment. In this case, what we're really looking at here is excess sedimentation, well beyond what you would consider a natural rate of sedimentation due to higher stream flows and erosion that we're seeing in Lower Rice Creek. Thanks for the questions and clarification. So, following some of the diagnostic work, we sought to prioritize which of those stream banks in different parts of Lower Rice Creek were the biggest problems. So if we're going to do a project to try and stabilize these stream banks, where should we prioritize our dollars? I know you can't see all of these little dots here, but they are color-coded with warmer colors like red and yellow and orange, indicating more severe erosion. So this is the stretch right here where we have some of our worst erosion issues in Lower Rice Creek. So this was where we targeted our efforts. So this is a map showing the project area for the Lower Rice Creek Stabilization Project. Not coincidentally, all of these parcels are on publicly owned land, either owned by the City of Fridley or Anoka County Parks, and they have been excellent partners to work with, I'll say. Very accommodating, easy to work with. Can't say enough about how great it's been working with them. So, to advance this project, we acquired a Clean Water Fund grant of just over $550,000 for a total project cost of $718,000. Right now, if we look at our timeline, we are in the design phase. So the project kicked off last year with the acquisition of the grant and the hiring of the district engineer. Right now, the project engineer. The project engineer is working on design. So that's this winter. We expect this spring that the plans will go out to bid for construction. And just briefly, we did release a request for proposals to our engineering pool. So the Watershed District does maintain a pool of engineers. It has been our policy, I guess, to use the engineering pool for these types of projects for the last, say, 10 years. So that was done again here. The board selected Barr Engineering as the project engineer. Barr has recently produced and delivered a conceptual design memo. This is something that we've been doing with other stream stabilization and restoration projects. Provides a basis for permit applications to the DNR and the Corps of Engineers. Also helps hone our designs for the project itself. So the conceptual memo we have now, here's an example of some of the pages from the conceptual memo. It lays out all of the different sites, so like site 1, here's site 4, and different stabilization scenarios, including rough cost estimates for what it would take to stabilize those areas. The concept memo also includes kind of these generic drawings for different tools that you would use to construct, to stabilize. So in this case, we're looking at different types of riprap installations for tow protection in Lower Rice Creek. So here is a list of all of our sites. We have 11 sites that we're looking at doing stream bank stabilization, different alternatives that the engineer is recommending, and then an overall cost. And you can see there's a pretty wide range down here, right about $300,000 up to approaching $500,000. So the median is around $368,000. Now, since this concept memo was produced, we did another site visit. We'd already done some, but thought it was beneficial to do another site visit with the engineer, specifically walking some of the potential access routes to this site. If you recall in the past, we talked about perhaps one of the more difficult aspects, or the most difficult aspect of this project, is site access. It's very steep. You can get a sense here on the right side of this photo, for example, approaching from that side to do construction would be very difficult because of the grades. And the other side generally would require a lot of tree removal and crossing low areas and things like that. Here's just another way of looking at it. This is a hillshade map, the same thing I showed you before. You can see how steep it is along this north bank of the project area. A little bit more accessible from the south, and we do have access from a public road there, but oftentimes that would require cutting across floodplain area, cutting down lots of trees, etc. So, point being, and I think the engineer learned this full well after the site visit, this number right here, their original cost estimate, $368,000, was quite a bit below our budgeted number. And our budgeted number was, for construction, the budget number was $603,000. So we first saw this number and I thought, well, that seems a bit low for the work that we're planning to do here. I anticipate that as we're moving into actual plans and specifications, the engineer's estimate for construction will go up and probably come closer to what our anticipated budget number is for the project. So again, our timeline. Draft plans are going to be coming this month. We anticipate final plans February or March, so this winter. Bidding is still slated to happen this spring, which we're told is a favorable time to release bids to contractors. It's kind of as they're planning out the rest of their construction season. And then we have a very wide construction window, anytime from August 2020 through February of 2021. That was not by mistake. We kind of front-loaded a lot of this work at the front end of the project so that we would have a wide construction window. One of the reasons being that water levels are an issue here. We haven't really had low water anywhere in the district for the last couple of years, and that's true for Lower Rice Creek also. So we're keeping this wide construction window with the idea of providing some flexibility to the contractor so that when conditions are right for access and construction, that's available to them. Just a couple of other notes on the schedule. We are anticipating that when we do bidding, having a mandatory pre-bid walkthrough with contractors. We've done that with some other projects recently, and I think the board has been supportive of that. It will be up to the board's discretion whether or not to, if you wanted to disqualify a bid because a contractor decided not to show up to that mandatory pre-bid, but I think that's going to be our recommendation, is that we have the mandatory pre-bid contractor walkthrough, and that would be a requirement for selecting them as a contractor.
I'd like to just kind of reconfirm that with the board. I agree, because I think it's important for them to see before they make final bids. So if everybody, the consensus is we will follow your lead on that. I agree. So.
Thank you. We can revisit that later, but thank
Yeah.
you. That's all I had for Lower Rice Creek. Any other questions
Very good.
on
Questions?
this project?
Madam President, so last night I was at the MOD meeting for the Metropolitan, and I heard the same issue raised that I had listened to at a subcommittee a couple months ago on the legislature, and they were worried about grant money and how it's used and what successes and you don't have. And to me, this is a pretty good chunk of grant money that's coming here in the Clean Water Fund that is an example of a successful maintenance of a facility that has been award-winning for its, and I would hope that as we go through and finish this project, and at some time along the line, we're going to have to write a summary of what monies we received and what monies, how it went. This is one that's on the plus side. Now, I'm going to look for some on the negative too, because I don't want to send down a report that says everything's in fa-la-la land. I want to be realistic about it. But I think that this is one of those big money projects and I just ask you to put that on the checklist later on. Keep it in mind.
Will do. Thank you, Manager Waller.
President Preiner, Board of Managers. Matt, I was kind of curious about the table you showed there. It showed the various alternatives, and it looked like you've already selected the alternative you'd like to do, and maybe how you go about the vetting of alternatives.
Yep, Madam Chair, Administrator Tomczyk. So the alternatives, these are recommendations. The alternatives are recommended by the project engineer at this point. But I would say they're not finalized really until we go through the draft plans and look through those. So it is, district staff weigh in on this also. I'll say when I've looked at the alternatives so far, there's been a pretty easy choice between what's doable and what's not doable on the site. But
Thank you.
And that might come to some conclusion too, when you do a walkthrough. Maybe no contractor's gonna wanna do it a certain way.
Right.
So we might learn that later. Okay, Matt, continue?
okay. Okay, Madam Chair, members of the board, so now I have an update on our Long Lake Lino Chain of Lakes Carp Management Program. So this program is new, as you recall. I have some background slides here to refresh your memory and for the benefit of our new manager, and then an update on activities in 2019 happening with this program and where we're going with 2020. So I shouldn't need to spend a lot of time on this slide at this point. I think the Board of Managers is well aware how carp impact water quality. It's been well documented, but their feeding and rooting activity in the bottom of the lakes can have very negative impacts on lake water quality. It's been well established in literature, and we've seen it firsthand in our watershed. But again, the reason I bring this up, I show this slide again, the purpose of the district's work on carp management is for the benefit of water quality. So the district has done carp management elsewhere in the watershed, but the vast majority of our efforts have been in the Long Lake Lino Chain of Lakes system, which is what this figure is showing here. So Long Lake down here, and the Lino Chain of Lakes up and to the right. So Long Lake is a fairly deep lake. What we've seen through research from the U of M in this area is that carp generally use Long Lake as their winter refuge and then migrate every year up into the shallow Lino Chain of Lakes to spawn and feed. And then that cycle repeats every year. So I'm not going to spend much time on these numbers, but when we ask how's the water quality in this system, it's not good. Long Lake is listed as impaired. The Lino Chain of Lakes also listed as impaired. Frequent and sometimes intense algae blooms in both systems. Picture's worth 1,000 words. There's what the systems can look like in midsummer. Long Lake on the left, one of the Lino Chain lakes on the right. So we know that we have poor water quality in the Lino Chain. We know that carp cause water quality problems. We found out pretty quickly a few years ago that carp are a problem in the Lino Lake, Long Lake system. We know that we have lots of them. These are photos from commercial fishermen removal in Long Lake a few years ago, about 250,000 pounds over a couple of years. So this is well beyond what would cause water quality problems in the system. So adopted in 2018, and this was after years of work both by the University of Minnesota and Rice Creek Watershed, multiple grants, other partners, we adopted our Rice Creek Carp Management Plan, including a specific plan for the Long Lake Lino Chain of Lakes system. So last year was our first year implementing that plan. Again, the purpose of this plan, or what our ultimate goal is to reduce the carp density below the threshold at which they impact water quality. So there's not an option out there for eliminating carp from the system, but our goal here is to reduce from their current density, which is roughly 800 kilograms per hectare, well up into the area where they cause water quality problems, to something below that, something below this cutoff line, which is roughly 100 kilograms per hectare. That's what research has found. So that is our goal. How we're going to get there with the management plan. Currently, our plan is to remove at least 50% of the adult carp annually and to suppress juvenile recruitment annually. That is either suppress reproduction or when we do have young of the year carp, prevent them from rejoining the rest of the population. And the idea with this plan is to consistently implement it every year, but be flexible from year to year in our approach and the tools that we use. So in 2019, we used two primary tools for management. The first was baited box nets. So the way that these nets work is they're rectangular nets that protrude from the lake and they're baited with corn. The only fish really that feeds on corn in our system is common carp, and corn bait readily attracts them. So they can be captured in these nets and then rolled up into boats for removal. So this does work, and we did do this in 2019, but on a pretty limited scale. So we only did one lift, removing about 700 carp, fairly low cost for the effort. Although I will say $10 a fish is too high a cost for that removal. But what the real aim for this work here is to refresh the population estimate. If we weren't doing that anyway, as kind of incidental to this work, we probably wouldn't have done it. So this remains a viable tool, and we might consider using this tool in the future. It does work, but it works best when it's implemented on a larger scale over a long period of time where you get some efficiencies. So it was used in a limited way this year. Our much larger effort went into using the low voltage electric barrier, which you've heard a lot about. It's from Procom Systems. The system itself is called the NEPTUN system. Procom is a company out of Poland. This was the first time that this Procom system was used in the United States to control carp. It's not going to be the last. There's many others now that are jumping on this bandwagon. But here's what the system looks like. That's a controller there. Here are the electrodes being installed at one of our sites. That's what they look like when water levels are low. You can see that the electrodes float. When water levels are higher, you can't see them. But the idea with this system is to block migrating carp. So as they're migrating from Long Lake to the Lino chain of lakes in the spring, to block their migration and then trap them and remove them. So some more photos. Here's what the system looks like at Long Lake. So water flow is actually from left to right going into Long Lake. So when fish are migrating, they're moving from the right to the left. They're encountering this barrier, and the barrier is directing them into a trap for removal. There's another photo of them. I think because you're doing well on time, you might appreciate the video, which I'll show real quickly. And I'll skip ahead. It's a long video, but what you can barely see underneath the water here is the actual electrodes of the barrier and the carp aggregating on the downstream side. We weren't sure what to expect with this barrier when we first bought it. We've been very impressed with it. It has worked well in high water and low water. Fish simply will not pass it. It's been very effective. It's been probably the best part of the program so far, how well this system has worked.
Is there any other new technology, Matt, that'll be coming along with this, or I assume this company is working on more things?
They are. I'm going to be perfect lead-in. I'm talking about that
All
next.
right, I'm
Thank
just
you.
guessing, but
So here again, if I skip forward in the video, you can see the fish have moved along. Fish have moved along the barrier, and this would be what's later will be the trap. And I'll show you that in the next photo here. Okay. Okay. Here is a photo from this past spring. So the electric barrier in this case is right along this line here that's along the surface, but the actual electrodes are under the water. We did have some concerns about performance when water levels are really high, and we've had really high water levels for a couple of years now. Happy to say that even when water levels are high and there's some distance between the top of the electrode and the water surface, it still performs quite well. You can see in the bottom of this photo here is a constructed trap. So when the fish would swim into this is like a PVC fence, essentially, that the fish cannot escape from. Here's another view of it. And here you can see some of the technicians corralling the carp once they're caught inside this PVC fence up into a net, and then the fish would be removed into this boat. So this was the process that was used this past year. Here's a photo of the fish being removed from the net. What I can say here is this is difficult, backbreaking work for these technicians. It worked reasonably well, but as I'm going to talk about in the future, we're going to look for ways to improve efficiency here and make this a little bit more automated and work better. But as a proof of concept, it did work quite well.
like a boat lift, that'll pull them all up.
So this is one pull of fish coming up into the boat, you can see here. And then they're carried by boat up onto land, and we actually had them hauled away in dumpsters, which is unfortunate that right now there's no other use for them. But for now, anyway, our DNR permit requires that they are either incinerated or buried. I think that's exactly what the permit says. So in this case, they were going to a landfill. So here's a summary of this effort. In 2019, we had 4,300 carp removed with this system. I would call this a moderate effort. So about $20,000 were spent on this effort. $4.60 per fish is pretty good. I think we can continue to improve that number over time. The additional benefit with this work is we get to refine that population estimate, and we're able to track juvenile carp as they move through this system. So here's just kind of my summary slide then of 2019 activities. We did get a new population estimate. It's roughly 26,000 carp. That estimate changes from year to year because it's difficult to estimate a population of animals, but also because the population itself changes from year to year. But we need to know that as we refine our management actions and our program. We removed just over 5,000 of the carp. That's roughly 20% of the population. If you recall, our goal is 50% of the population. I think for our first year in this program, 20% is not bad. And as long as we're continuing to improve over the years and eventually hit that 50% mark and then stick with that from year to year, we're going to be happy. So 2020, we anticipate that percentage to go up. But for the first year of the program, I think this was pretty good. What worked, as I mentioned, the low voltage barrier worked quite well. That trap or the PVC fence worked quite well. Where we're going to be focusing our efforts for improvement this coming year is in efficiency. So really reducing the amount of labor for physical removal and handling, that's where costs go up. So we're looking for ways to improve that efficiency. Also had some issues with security and vandalism. We are working with the district engineer to do some site improvements, like in security fence, and different ways to improve this efficiency for removing the carp. So if you recall, our overall budget for this program that the board approved is $200,000 a year. In 2019, we spent $140,000 of that, so we didn't spend all of it. We're $60,000 under. I think that's not totally surprising for the first year. We're kind of moving into it here, but we can continue to revisit that budget number as we're going forward. One of the major challenges in 2019 and probably in future years is water level. Here's a picture of the site shortly after ice out when fish start to run, and you can see the entire site is really flooded. Luckily, the location where we have some of the more sensitive electronic equipment and things like that is above water, not by a lot, but water levels here have been high for the past couple of years, and this is a challenge for this program and all of our other projects as well, Lower Rice Creek and many of the other things we do, but that's something that we're keeping an eye on. I will mention our idea for improving efficiency. And President Preiner, this is what you were asking about in the future. How can we improve this efficiency or new technologies? What was tested this past fall with the Procom company, here's the engineer from Procom, is actually inside this PVC fence using portable electrodes to herd the fish into a small area, stunning them, not killing them, but stunning them, and then removing them with a conveyor belt. After quite a bit of testing and kind of finagling with the electrical system, settings and systems and things like that, it worked quite well. So this is something that we're going to be trying more in 2020 to refine this process and get by with less labor and more automation. The tricky thing about this too is that the carp migration patterns can change, and so you need to have a small but flexible crew, not a large crew that you send out there every day. If you can imagine sending a crew of 5 and then saying, they're not running today or they're not in the trap, all right, everybody go home, we'll come back tomorrow. That doesn't work out well, so this is why we're trying to move to a more automated method. And that's what I had. Thank you for your attention and any questions.
Questions from the board?
Well, Madam President, first, I want to remind the audience in television land that this was recognized by the Board of Soil and Water Resources last year, and Mr. Kocian is here in person today. It's nice to see he doesn't come to our every meeting. And so he was awarded Employee of the Year, I reckon it was, wasn't it? And for this particular project and his work in it. And so from then on, I don't have any more questions. He's doing fine and dandy.
Madam President, I recall last time we were looking at a whoosh, and I guess that didn't work out.
Manager Bradley, we did try the whoosh system. The whoosh system is effective at moving carp from one location to another, but for the cost of the system and the, not just to purchase it, but to transport it, hook it up, and use it every year, I don't think it's going to improve efficiency on the site.
The whoosh system, is that the shooter system?
Yes, that's the one that vacuums them up and delivers them to a truck.
Right. Beth, I believe we had a video on that, which is certainly much more dramatic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that answers my question.
All right. Anybody else? Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
Okay, staff reports. Anybody have any comments on the staff reports or questions? And then we'll go to the February calendar. Anybody gonna be here in February?
No, we're all leaving, we're going to, the meetings will be held in Puerto Rico and San Juan. We got a special deal down there due to earthquake.
Just so we have it on our calendar, why don't you guys tell us exactly when you're gonna be gone here?
I will be gone the month of February, so I will not be at the board workshop or the 2 board meetings.
Okay,
I do, however, have the equipment
good.
to
Participate
video conference in on February 10th.
No, on the 10th, okay. That sounds good. Mike?
I will be missing the workshop on the 6th and the 8th. I'm looking at the calendar here, and it shows the 22nd. Normally, we have the, would be the 29th, that's what I thought we, oh,
The first and third, it should be the 5th.
hold on a second.
I'm a little confused, what's the 10th that we, that's a Friday according to this calendar.
I think this is
So,
wrong.
Well, don't look at that, look at the
Yep.
front page.
yeah, so
Front
at any rate, I will be back for the one that I
I
have
see,
shown as
okay.
being on the, the 26th.
Yes.
Mike will be back on the 36th, okay? And Chris, when are you gonna be gone?
Madam President, I'm gonna be on vacation beginning February 28th to February 5th.
January 28th, isn't it?
Yeah, January 28th to February 5th.
Okay,
So I won't be missing any board meetings.
very good.
I don't seem to get vacation, so I'll be here.
And I had one, so I guess we're good. John, you're gonna be on call here?
My own fault, but
So it's up to me to show up so we have a meeting, huh?
Then we'll have to have a quorum.
Well, now that's an interesting
Just let us know
situation,
ahead,
isn't it, huh?
so we don't have to make any plans. Okay, with that, we'll go to manager's update. I think Manager Waller had comments.
Yes, I did. So earlier this month, we had Washington County had our usual consortium meeting. There were a number of topics there. I don't know if I talked about it this last meeting, but I'm going to review it again. We had a state climatologist there. His name is Mr. Kenny Blumfeld. He's a PhD. He gave a very nice presentation. If you have an opportunity to listen to him sometime, do. Basically, he's telling you that the winters in Minnesota are getting warmer. That's the effect of global warming. No need for you to take vacations in that case. But the summers are bringing more rain, and I think he said that out of every 7 years, we're actually getting 8 years rain in the last couple of decades. So don't worry about the return of the glaciers, but you start to worry about Lake Agassiz as we're catching up with more rain. So this means that runoff is very important, and what our main business here is to make sure that there's a conveyance system that functions properly. There's also, for the USGS was there to talk about high water tables, and then the ecological water resources was there talking about floodplains. But the exciting one, I guess, to listen to was the climatologist. So then I attended the let's see, this is last night's meeting. What they call these days the Legislative Committee on Subcommittee on Minnesota Water Policy in January on the 15th. And while there were quite a few topics they were talking about there, the biggest one they're talking about is this chemical problem from 3M, which we've discussed before, but it's known by the letters of PFAS. And apparently it floats all over the place. It comes back up in foam out of the ground, where unexpected places, they have films of it. And this has become a great concern to folks that live down the Mississippi River, because some of these towns take their water out of the Mississippi River, and Of course, as we know, Oakdale and some of the other communities in southern Washington County have really large carbon filters for all of their water and go through this. And so this is a bigger problem than what they thought. So remember how it was, well, gee whiz, it's 5 miles. No, it's everything south of Highway 36 on Washington County. Well, now we're starting to talk about Goodhue, Wabasha, Winona, and our other neighbors as possible problems here. So, and in addition to that, they are discovering that it's not just exclusive to Washington County. You might find it over in the Ford plant at Ramsey because they've started testing for it in the billions now. And so this is going to be a large issue for a long time to deal with. And then finally, of course, as you know, annually I always said I wanted to see rotation of the officership here. I believe it makes a stronger management team. And so this year, anticipating that the election would be in the regular time, I did a little extra research, provided some examples of where this has been done in written policy. Washington County has done this for over 20 years, but they don't have a written policy. And there's a need for written policy because they've had a couple of hiccups. For example, what happens when you annually change the chairmanship and he dies in office. And by the way, that's happened here. I remember that when President Peterson died a couple of decades ago. And then the other hiccup they ran across was that one of their members that came in the board and in the rotation that they've been using for years, it was on there a year, and then the next year that was the turn for that particular district to be the chairmanship. The individual didn't feel comfortable with that, so they adjusted, at her request, adjusted the idea of the rotation. So that's what I'm interested in. I'm not interested in being any of the primary officers. We have adopted this. I would say Washington County be in the 5th place, so everybody knows that. But I do think that you need to alternate between counties and between some of these officerships. And so that's why I brought instead of just complaining, I brought some substance for people to look at and talk about later. And then last night at the Board of Soil and Water Resources meeting, we had, not the Board of Soil and Water Resources, the Metro Mod meeting there. The part they're all complaining about money. There was just lots of complaints about money. But one of the things I listened to carefully to was the Metropolitan Planning Commission representative was there. And so I asked my question, which I asked many years ago.
Yep.
And thank you, Madam President. You know, as Madam President remembers, we were in Hugo 5, 6, 10 years ago, whatever it was. And I sat through a whole meeting and I was quiet, which is not common for me.
That's strange.
And I didn't know the lady who I was sitting next to. I had been invited to sit at the front of the table when I had a chair in the back room, you know. And so at the end of the presentation by the Met Council and the DNR we had about 6 different cities there from the northern part of I asked the question, okay, who's giving us the money? And so the Do Nothing Rangers of the DNR, as known, said, not us. We're not doing anything here. And Met Council was quiet. And 6 months later, or when we had the next meeting, our representative from Met Council came back and said, got $1 million grant program for you guys if you want to apply and be competitive. So I went over and grabbed the administrator and walked him right over because he's a much more polished individual than I am to talk to that lady. And we got 2 grants out of there, several $100,000. And so last night, that's what I was asking. What happened to the grant program? So this year, they said, well, what do you know? They don't have it going on for 2020, but for 21, they thought they had $400,000 maybe. So please put, as I said last night, shouted at Nick, write that down. We want to get into the competition here because in the past, I think we've gotten, is it 400,000 or 200,000? We've gotten a lot of money out of it. It was doggone worth the value. So that's all I have to report at this time. And
Thank you, Jen. Andrew Brandley.
just to continue to be disappointed in Bowser and their failure to provide meaningful support in the metro area. They used to be a great source of funds for us because we do quality things. I don't see that in the future, so we are going to have to look, as John said, for other sources, probably the legislature.
Mr. Wayman?
Well, I guess I agree 100% with what Manager Bradley just said, and also, I'd just like to say welcome and congratulations to our newest member. And that's it.
That's it, right.
And I'm looking forward to service on this board. The meeting that I attended last night with Maud, I was able to keep up with the acronyms because that is the work that I've been doing over the last 30-some years. So I think I can bring some experience and, expand the viewpoints of the board here. So looking forward to my time as the
Having you here.
manager. Thank you.
The only thing I'd like to say is about the acronym, saying, it's probably a good idea even for our staff to use them, but then tell us exactly what you're referring to for a while. I think it'd be easier on the board in general.
I still
And any
have
new
trouble
members.
with half of
Yeah,
them.
yeah, sometimes you go, what was that? Anything else? Okay, I'll need a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.